Hi, my name is Callan Bentley, and I'm an assistant professor of geology at Northern Virginia Community College. The following is a presentation that I made earlier this month, October 2011, at the National Meeting of the Geological Society of America in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The title of my talk is A National Blog as a Medium for Student Engagement. So the first thing to know is that I write a geology blog. This blog began almost 4 years ago, and it was called Nova Geoblog then. My community college, Northern Virginia Community College, is usually called Nova by people who don't want to say the whole long name. So that title was sort of the obvious one, especially for the purpose, which was sharing information with students. As time went by, however, I found that people other than my students were reading the blog, and at some point I decided that I would change it to a new blog aimed at a more cosmopolitan, international, and national audience of geology enthusiasts. So the new name of the blog was Mountain Beltway. It was hosted on a WordPress site for a while, and then in October of last year, about a year ago, in fact, the AGU, the American Geophysical Union, picked it up as one of the blogs that they were hosting on their new AGU blogosphere. So that's where it's been ever since. I get a lot out of blogging. A couple of things that I've gotten out of it are shown here on this slide. Here's a comment, for instance, from a reader who found an explanation I had put up about the relationship between bedding and cleavage and determining whether bedding was overturned or not. And this is the sort of feedback that really makes a blogger happy, where you can see that it actually gave her a huge amount of benefit. She didn't understand a concept, found the blog, read it, and got the concept, and then is going on to share it with other people in her class. Another example of a benefit that I got from blogging is one time when I wrote about something that wasn't in my area of expertise, river landscape evolution. And I had drawn a graphic to teach it using sort of the outdated model that is the one that I inherited in my current job position. But I quickly got a lot of feedback from people who did have expertise in fluvial geomorphology that the concepts I was teaching were out of date and basically false. And so as a result of that, I got great feedback about something I otherwise never would have heard about, and I was able to change my teaching technique accordingly. Down here in the lower left, you can see Dr. Fatim Hankard. She's a postdoc at the University of Michigan, working in the paleomagnetic lab of Rob Vandervoo. She read one of my blog posts and then suggested a research collaboration on the paleomagnetic signatures of the Catoctin Formation feeder dikes in Shenandoah National Park. So she obviously had the paleomagnetic expertise and the big fancy drill there, whereas I had knowledge about where to find the rocks that were needed. And we're going to be presenting the results of that research this winter in December 2011 at the AGU fall meeting. In the lower right is a standard feature of my blog, the Friday Fold. This photograph is not mine, but one by a photographer named Alistair Knock, who let me repost it as the Friday Fold, a weekly feature that shows some sort of folded rock unit somewhere in the world. And I annotated this photo like I do to a lot of my photos, and the annotations caught the eye of an editor for a textbook company who thought that it would be the sort of thing that he would like to see in the textbooks that company publishes. And so that led to us having a series of talks, and potentially there's now going to be a pretty big and hopefully lucrative collaboration between me and that publishing company. And again, that wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the blog. Blogs can also gather some negative feedback. Here's, for an example, a sort of crazy ranting email that I got a couple weeks ago, just before GSA, in fact, showing the way somebody, oh no, this thing is locked up. Oh, there we go. Showing somebody's reaction to a post that I had written about the rapture and its prediction and failure to materialize. And so there are a lot of kooky people out there, or there are people who just think differently, than you or I might, and they will sometimes let you know if they're offended. But what I'm really worried about is my students. So I teach a very diverse student group, and I'm worried that some of my students might perceive some of the stuff I write on the blog as being irrelevant at best and offensive at worst. So I decided that I was going to survey my students to see what they thought about my blog. So I conducted a survey online, basically looking at the students who've taken my classes in the past 3 years. I had 90 students participate in the survey. The majority of them had taken physical geology, which is definitely my most populated class at Nova. A lesser number had taken some of these other classes, including structural geology, which is a class I teach at George Mason University. I asked them if they had ever read my blog, and about 78% of them said that they had, 22% said that they hadn't. So at this point, the 22% are done with the survey and they move on to bigger and better things. Those who answered yes continued answering questions. The third question I asked them was how they access the geoblog. The majority of them actually got to it by clicking on a link from Blackboard, which is our courseware platform. It is an official, domain of the college, and I have a link there that goes to the unofficial domain, which is my geology blog. So about 60% of them accessed it that way. It's also, I guess, worthwhile to me to note that a lot of them accessed it via posts that are published on Facebook. I sort of have the blog set up to automatically post on Facebook, and so students who have friended me on Facebook get to see it that way. And that's almost 30% of the population. I asked them how frequently they read my blog, and the answers here are pretty spread out. There are very few people who are obsessive enough to read it once a day, but we do have a majority of responses basically being in the several times a week to once a week range, with then a lesser number spread out over longer periods of time. I asked them if they continued reading the blog after the class that they were taking with me had finished. And obviously this doesn't apply to students who are currently in my classes, but it does apply to older students who've already taken a class with me and moved on. And basically the majority of them said yes. So if they'd read my blog, they continued reading it. And that total was, on the order of 80% or so, whereas only 21% or so said that they did not continue reading it after class was over. I asked them to rate the quality of different aspects of my geology blog, starting with frequency of the updates to the blog, how interesting they found the content, the writing style, the illustrations, the blog's helpfulness in conveying geologic concepts, and how engaged they felt with geology as a result of reading the blog. They were rating these on a scale that basically ran from 1, which was couldn't be worse, to excellent, which is couldn't be better. Those were assigned numerical values, with 1 being awful and 5 being excellent. And the majority of the responses are highlighted in yellow. So the average rating is shown in the second to last column, and the number of students who answered each question is shown in the very last column. And obviously you can see here that basically we're looking at a fairly positive evaluation of most aspects of the geology blog. I then gave the students a list of adjectives that I came up with, and I just brainstormed a bunch of positive and negative adjectives that I thought perhaps somebody might want to apply to the blog, and asked the students to essentially select the ones that they thought were accurate descriptions of the blog. And you can see here basically the adjectives in the far left column, and then the response percent in the far right column. It's graphically represented obviously with the orange bars, and then the actual number of counts shown on the far right. So there were a bunch of different possibilities I gave them. You can take a look at some of the ones that they selected here. And here is a word cloud looking at some of those different possibilities. My presentation software is freezing up here. There we go. The word cloud here basically shows the responses that were rather infrequent as rather small text that you can see in places like that. And then the ones that were very frequent are shown in larger type. There were a few write-ins as well, shown over here on the right, and a tally at the lower right showing the overall responses. Basically, most of them were positive and only a few were negative. Here's another word cloud answering the question, what, if anything, do you particularly like about the blog? And so about 40 students responded to this question, and they had a bunch of things to say. A word cloud, of course, takes a input of a bunch of text and then picks out the words that are most frequently repeated and shows them as a larger font size. Words that are less frequently repeated are smaller. And then I'm going to give you some quotes down here at the bottom to give you a sense of what the students said. I'm not going to read these to you. I figure you can read them on your own. Okay. What, if anything, did you particularly dislike about the blog is shown here. And we've got another word cloud, and you can see what the most obvious or the most common response is there. Fewer people answered this question, and of the fewer that answered, a lot of them said that they didn't find anything wrong with the blog. Here are a few quotes to illustrate what they were saying. Well, okay, the presentation software here was skipping over one of those quotes. I'm not sure what the deal is there, but there was one student who said basically that he felt like I was rather scathing and wasn't respectful necessarily to people who didn't share my beliefs. And I would argue, of course, that I don't have beliefs, but a lot of people like to use that language. And then you can see this one's a pretty neutral sort of comment. Final question that I asked the students was whether reading the blog had any effect on their decision to take other geology courses. And the students responded, as you can see here on the right. Some said that it had no effect on them at all. That's this large response up here at the top. The most frequent response is, yes, it encouraged me to take other geology classes because it showed me that geology is fascinating. Other people said it was encouraging on several other fronts, which included easiness of geology, identification with my political opinions, or identification with my atheism. No student said that it discouraged them from taking other classes because of my political opinions or attitude towards religion. And only one student said it discouraged them from taking other geology classes because it suggested to them that geology was difficult. So overall, I think that's a pretty positive response. Again, a representative quote with traditional student spelling. And one more there. So overall here, basically we have 55 positive responses, 25 neutral, and 1 negative. So what do I take from all of this data that my students have shared with me? I take that they dominantly approve of what they're getting from the blog and that they find it useful, and so I conclude that I should continue doing it.